That's always a bit daunting.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so delighted that you've made the time in your busy schedules to join us tonight at FAAST Hub Scotland. So welcome to this evening's webinar, Upskilling the Workforce. What a great title that is. I am delighted to say we're joined by the FAAST in-house researchers, Dr. Stewart McDougall and Dr. Ruth Brown. The Fetal Alcohol Advisory and Support Team, the FAAST, the FAST team, as we refer to in all our meetings, are based at the University of Edinburgh. And they have a national mandate to provide training, consultation, and research aimed at supporting healthcare professionals who work with individuals affected by FASD. I think a core objective of the team is to strengthen the capacity, knowledge, and confidence of Scotland's health and social care workforce through targeted training initiatives. And so tonight we are so delighted to welcome Ruth and Stewart, who will share insights into their ongoing work, which focuses on assessing healthcare professionals' knowledge of attitudes towards FASD in Scotland. They'll also present findings on the impact of the team's fundamentals in the FASD webinar series, particularly in the training's ability to improve knowledge and attitudes. So I guess before we move on to their presentation and questions, and we've had many questions from the hub cohort of parents who are obviously huge advocates and are always wanting to move everything forward. I think it would only be fair to hand over to both Stewart and Ruth. I'm probably going to hand over to Ruth first. They have a presentation for you this evening. I have a stock of questions and your questions as well, which we will definitely cover. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ruth first, and then she'll probably hand over to Stewart. They'll do their presentation, and then we will move into questions. So Ruth, welcome this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We are eternally grateful for the FAST team's support and commitment to the hub.
Oh, thank you so much. And it goes without saying that the FAST team echo such sentiments to the hub. And thank you so much for inviting us along to share some of our research that we've been conducting over the past year or so. So I'm Ruth Brown. I'm one half of the postdoctoral research fellows within the FAST team. I've been in the post for going on about 3 years now, which is scary. But just a little bit about my background. I have always had a vested interest in neurodevelopmental conditions. A lot of my postgrad work was specifically focused on autism. What also really interested me was emotion recognition and emotion regulation within autistic populations. And looking at a phenomenon called alexithymia, which is the difficulties that we can experience in recognizing the emotions that we feel. I've also dabbled in a bit of work in ADHD as well, between finishing my PhD and joining the FAST team. So it's been quite interesting reflecting on my past work, where I do actually feel like I've kicked myself quite a lot for not considering FASD within quite a lot of the work that I've done. It's just been there. It's been there in the periphery. But I'm just so happy that I've landed on my feet within the FAST team, and I just keep learning new things every day about FASD. And yeah, I'll stop waffling on. I'll pass the baton over to Stewart.
Fabulous. Thank you, Stewart.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks, Joe and the Hub, for the opportunity to come and speak to you all tonight. So I'm Stewart McDougall, and I'm the other postdoc research fellow within the FAAST team. I think I sell it well with the name and a ginger beard, but I'm from Australia originally, as you might pick up by the accent. When I was in Australia, I was working for a child protection research team. And through the work that I was doing with the Child Protection Centre, the Australian Centre for Child Protection, I did a couple of projects that were about FASD, and that was really my introduction to FASD. And in that population, seeing really quite quickly how prevalent FASD would be, but how overlooked it is, and how there was just a lack of response in the child protection system for individuals who might have FASD in Australia, and that's something that can probably be said about a lot of places in the world. Through the Centre for Child Protection, I did my PhD looking at developing a screening tool for kids with FASD, which needs a bit more work before we can try and roll that one out, but that's something that I'm hopeful to keep exploring. And through doing that work, I met some of the Jen and Sarah from the FAST team at a conference in Canada, and years down the track saw a Twitter post about hiring postdoc fellows, and threw my hat into the ring and found myself leaving Australia, seeking permission from the Australian government in COVID times to leave the country to travel overseas. But
what an amazing story, though, Stewart.
Yeah, it was quite surreal to get offered the job in Australia, where we were very worried about COVID and seeing what was happening elsewhere in the world, and be like, do we really want to leave the relative safety? But the way
that is amazing. I never knew that story. Actually, that's all new to me. I'm amazingly impressed that you took that step for this community of people. That's like such an amazing thing to know.
Yeah, to be fair, Scotland was a pretty easy sell. We were
Well, as opposed to Australia, or
yeah, in terms of places in the world to move, Scotland was yeah.
And are you okay? So, like, apart from the webinar tonight, I just need to know, how good is Scotland for you in comparison to Australia? Sorry, Barbara, just need to know this.
I love it. It's just fantastic. Edinburgh is such a fantastic city. I'm so fortunate to live in a place that so many people want to come and visit. And the weather drags a little bit, particularly as we should be heading into summer and it's a bit rainy, but it's also kind of nice to have the seasons. And lucky enough to go for the past 2 Februaries, have gone back to Australia for 2 weeks of summer to break up Scottish winter as well. But no, it's just fantastic.
Oh, I'm like now I can't concentrate on the webinar because I'm just like so blown away by the story.
But I'll wrap up my introduction there. Otherwise, I'll prattle on forever, and I'll start sharing the slides, and we can things off with the presentation if that suits
Yeah,
everyone.
fabulous. Off you go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stuart. And apologies, everyone. You'll have to kind of watch me awkwardly. Stuart's being the technical whiz sharing the slides just now, so you might get sick of me saying next slide, but so forgive me. Just hi everyone again, and just a huge thanks again to the Hub for inviting myself and Stuart to come along this evening. We're so excited to tell you about some of the research that we've been conducting over the past year or so, which investigated the current level of knowledge and attitudes towards FASD in Scotland's health and social care professionals, and the effect of a bespoke training package, the fundamentals of FASD, on the knowledge and attitudes. Next slide, please. So just to say that none of this work couldn't have been possible without the other FAST team members who aren't sitting alongside us this evening. And I'm sure that many of you will be super familiar with them, but Jen Shields, our in-house consultant clinical psychologist, Dr. Sarah Brown, our consultant paediatrician, and Susanna Rourke, our senior lecturer and research advisor. Next slide. So I'm sure that everyone in this room will be acutely aware of this, but FASD continues to be one of the most under-recognised neurodevelopmental conditions in the UK. And this lack of recognition often starts with a limited awareness of the condition in healthcare professionals. So some past research, what I've got on the slide here, has supported this sentiment. So for example, a 2015 study of 390 professionals indicated that around 40% were unaware of the official guidelines on drinking during pregnancy. And fast forwarding to 2021, we didn't see much improvement. Just under 58% of midwives were aware of the updated 2016 alcohol guidelines, with 1 in 5 who said that they were aware still actually gave outdated recommendations. So you can, this advice could have led to possible confusion and potentially avoidable alcohol exposure. And when it comes to FASD itself, Howlett and colleagues' 2019 survey found that only 1 in 5 could correctly identify how common the condition was within the UK, with the vast majority of the health professionals questioned greatly underestimating the prevalence. So what these findings are telling us is that people with FASD and their families are more than likely and often left to face a system that isn't quite equipped enough to understand and support them fully. Next slide. So to address this, at FAAST, we're working to change the ongoing lack of awareness and knowledge of FASD within Scotland's health and social care system. So this year we launched our training and competency framework. And this is it's mapped onto a suite of training packages and postgraduate courses, offering a step-by-step approach to building the skills needed to diagnose and support individuals with FASD. So when the FAAST team was first established, we found that knowledge about the condition in Scotland's healthcare sector was extremely limited, and very few professionals felt fully confident in making a diagnosis. And most importantly, there were very little training programs designed specifically for healthcare staff that we could have recommended. So in some ways, that clean slate kind of gave us a bit of an opportunity. So we were able to just hit the pause button and ask, what does good FASD training actually look like? And what do different professionals need to know and to what level? So that led us to carefully map out the knowledge and skills required for each role, whether it's GPs, midwives, social workers, or others, making sure that we didn't overtrain or undertrain anyone. So the result of this was a 4-tiered training and competency framework, which shows who needs to know what and how we can get them there. And if you're interested, we've got a little QR code down there that if you're interested to find out more than welcome to give it a scan, or we've got some contact details at the end if you want to find out more as well. Next slide, please. So on the screen here, we have the 4 tiers within this framework. So at the informed level, we're talking about the essential knowledge and skills that everyone working in health, social care, education, justice, and the voluntary or third sector should have about FASD. So in other words, this is the baseline understanding of FASD that all staff need, regardless of their role. We then move on to the skilled level, and this is for staff who have direct or frequent contact with individuals affected by FASD, or whose roles can have an influence on their day-to-day lives. This includes professionals such as child and adolescent mental health workers, midwives, nurses, social workers, and those working in the justice system. Next is the enhanced level. This is aimed at staff whose roles involve more regular or intensive contact with people and families affected by FASD. And these might be professionals who carry out assessments, deliver interventions, or manage specialist services. And right at the tippy top, we have the experience level. This refers to those with highly specialist roles requiring a deep knowledge and advanced skills in the care, management, and support of individuals with FASD and their families. These professionals are often working in dedicated or expert service settings. So, from a research standpoint, however, myself and Stewart were interested to investigate the current landscape of FASD knowledge within Scotland, or in other words, to what extent were our healthcare professionals at the first informed level. So I'll now pass it over to Stewart, who will provide the findings from our study evaluating this.
Thanks, Ruth. So I'll speak through the evaluation of the knowledge and attitudes of Scotland's health and social care workers. So this was a piece of work that we undertook kind of as we were getting up and running with a lot of the training programs that we're offering. And the intention was to take a bit of a snapshot of where we're at. How much do people know? How familiar are health and social care professionals across Scotland with FASD? As FASD should be incorporated into the neurodevelopmental pathways, ensuring that a broad swathe of the professionals that are likely to interact with people with FASD are aware of it becomes really important. So we were really keen to look at the breadth across Scotland. So this was an online survey that we rolled out through the NHS. So we tried to get the directors of communication in every health board to directly email this survey to each and every healthcare worker. And we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just those professional groups that we would typically think about when it comes to FASD. So people were eligible if they were older than 16, working for the NHS or social care, and even if they didn't have those client-facing roles, we were still interested to know about what they knew of FASD. So the participants were asked to complete a brief questionnaire. It was made up of 4 kind of components. So we were interested in their knowledge of FASD. This was it was based on the multiple choice questions that we were asking of the students on our courses, just to get a general sense of, for some of the kind of basic facts around FASD, how much do people know? Are they familiar with the prevalence rates? Do they know what FASD means? Are they kind of across the current health and medical advice for alcohol use during pregnancy? The next set of questions asked about their attitudes towards the current health advice. And then there were 2 questionnaires adapted from some previous work, which looked at their beliefs and attitudes towards alcohol use during pregnancy and their beliefs about FASD. So questions such as the diagnosis would improve outcomes for those individuals with FASD, and how strongly people either agreed or disagreed with that question. All of those were scored on a scale from 1 to 5. And participants rated their own beliefs on those. In terms of the numbers of people that we got responding to the survey, we had just over 1,000 health and social care professionals at least start the survey. Of those, we had to discard 121 responses who had either kind of just opened it and not provided any responses, or had, in one of the first questions, had started it but had declined to participate further. So that left us with 897 responses that we could analyse. Shown on the screen now is a breakdown by health profession. So you can see that nursing made up the largest group that we had, and that's perhaps unsurprising given that about 42% of NHS Scotland are nurses or nursing staff. And we had a pretty good response from the other health professions that we would typically see involved with FASD. So a good response from allied health, social care, social work, the psychologists, mental health, an okay response from medics, not many midwives, which was interesting. And down the bottom, you'll see that there's a group called Other, and that was kind of it's ended up a bit of a grab bag of either the kind of admin and clerical roles, the scientific and research roles within the NHS, and then some small numbers from other clinical groups. So dentistry, audiology are captured in that other group. But we were quite pleased with the spread that we got, and 897 is a fairly substantial size in terms of the validity of the research. We asked people about their previous training on FASD, and for those 897, about 40%, 39.2% of the sample reported that they had either some previous training or prior experience in working with individuals with FASD. And you can see the breakdown by professional groups on the right-hand side of that screen. And what's quite nice to see is that for some of those groups, so the medics and the psychologists and mental health professionals in particular, it's quite reasonable in terms of the training rates. Sort of about 2/3 of those groups are reporting that they have either previous training or some experience. And as we go down that list, we can see that those numbers start to decrease. So we've got about 45% of the allied health and the social care workers reporting prior training. And then as we get down to some of the other groups who typically might not think about FASD, those training rates are quite low, but we would argue that it's still important for the whole health and social care workforce to be at least aware of FASD. These results, in contrast to some of the other recent surveys, suggest a slightly higher proportion in Scotland. So there was some recent work coming out of New Zealand, which found about 55% of medics and psychologists have had some training on FASD. So we're doing okay with some groups, but other groups there does need to be some more work to bring up that level of training. In terms of what those prior training experiences looked like, perhaps unsurprisingly, there was about half of those were attendees at various webinars, quite a bit of experience working directly with individuals with FASD. And what I think is quite interesting, and it's a shame that the numbers get cut off a little bit, is that we only have about 1/5 of those reporting that they received any training during their undergraduate degree, and slightly smaller for the postgraduate training. But it's also kind of nice to see that some of the training delivered by the FAAST team is appearing on this list. So we had a couple of people who have completed our postgrad level courses filling this out. And we also had a small proportion of healthcare professionals who identified that they were also the carers of children with FASD. Where the picture changes a little bit is the self-rated familiarity. So despite almost 2/3 of the psychologists and the medics reporting that they had had training, only 23% of either of those groups feel that they are very familiar with FASD. And the bulk of most of the professional groups feel that they're somewhat familiar, which suggests that there's some awareness out there, but a need for some higher level training and really trying to shift that picture so we have healthcare professionals out there that are more familiar and more confident in assessing, diagnosing, and working with individuals and families with FASD. We also had a look for across the kind of breadth of Scotland to see, are there particular areas where it's either a higher level reporting training or lacking training, or where there's some differences in the reported familiarity with FASD. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have highlighted the areas that were reporting the highest level of reported training. So we've got NHS Shetland, surprisingly, where just over 50% of respondents said that they had had some prior training, but conversely, they had about the lowest proportion of healthcare workers that felt that they were very familiar with FASD. On the other side, we can see that in NHS Fife, we have about 35% report some training, but 17% feel that they're very familiar with FASD. And I do wonder, as I look at these results, if there's a bit of an effect where people, if they have no information about FASD or very little information, do they perhaps feel a bit more confident? And then once they start to get a little bit of information, does that confidence and maybe that feeling of familiarity kind of fall off the curve, and we kind of need to push them through and keep delivering training to kind of build up that confidence at the other end, which would be something interesting to explore, but not something that we can look at with the data that we have at the moment. Sorry, it's my dog being very upset about the front gate. And then when we look at the differences in the FASD attitudes, knowledge, and that the attitudes towards the health advice between those with the prior training, we do see that those that report having some previous experience do have both more positive attitudes towards FASD. They scored higher on the knowledge measures, and they had more positive, so more favorable attitudes about prenatal alcohol exposure, so attitudes that were a bit more in line with what we would expect for the health advice. The figures above each one of those, particularly the R figure, refers to the strength of the effect there. And for the difference in the FASD attitudes, that was a moderate to strong effect, moderate for the knowledge, and quite a small effect for the health advice and for the PAE attitudes. But there was possibly people were kind of scoring quite highly, so there wasn't much scope for there to be difference on some of those scales apart from the FASD attitudes and the knowledge. Similarly, as we look at the self-reported familiarity, we see the same pattern. So as health professionals were increasingly familiar with FASD, they were scoring higher across each of those measures as we would expect. And that's a particularly marked difference for the FASD attitudes. Now this slide, we've looked at some of the questions that make up the scales that we were using, and we used scales that had been used in the previous literature. So some of the language might not be the best, but we are now taking a look to see, can we improve on these measures, and can we make measures that are a bit more fit for purpose. But what I wanted to highlight with these slides is the difference between the response patterns for people who have some previous training or no previous training, and these kind of stigmatizing questions where we see a bit of a shift in the pattern. So we see that for health professionals, their beliefs around women's knowledge of alcohol use during pregnancy, they appear to shift with some training. So a greater proportion of those with previous training disagree that women are generally aware of the harms associated with alcohol use in pregnancy, whereas those with no training, it's a bit of a higher proportion that are kind of assuming that women are aware of the harms associated with alcohol use during pregnancy. And we see that pattern repeated for those questions. And I think this speaks to the importance of training as a way to reduce some of those stigmatizing attitudes, particularly attitudes that might be associated with blame towards alcohol use during pregnancy. So just to wrap up with some key findings. So one of the major focuses of the team to date has been training professionals that are involved in the diagnosis of FASD. And we are seeing that about 2/3 of medics and psychologists report having received some training, a lower proportion for the allied health, nursing, midwifery. So there is, while we're making good progress, there is a need to go further with that. And what is quite promising is that prior training does show an association with the attitudes that are kind of more favourable, less stigmatising, which we would hope to see. And the access to training has been a bit mixed across the country. So that's despite a lot of it being delivered online and kind of freely available. There are parts of the country where we're not feeling like we're having as much kind of input and impact into the training there. And there's a few health boards. I think we've had people from just about every health board on our training courses, but there are a couple where we haven't had representation as of yet. So that wraps up my presentation. I'm going to hand back to Ruth, who's going to speak about the fundamentals, and then we'll have some time for questions after Ruth's presentation. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Stuart. And yeah, as Stuart mentioned, in this next section, I'll be giving you a tour of our training package that was developed with the informed level of competency in mind. This is called the Fundamentals of Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder for Health and Social Care Professionals, or Fundamentals of FAASD for short. So I'll be sharing our key findings from our evaluation of this training's effectiveness to improve the knowledge and informed attitudes towards both FAASD and alcohol use during pregnancy in Scotland's health and care sector. Next slide. So to give you a very, very brief overview of the training itself, it was delivered as a 90-minute webinar hosted on Teams, led by 2 of our FAAST team members. And there were several key learnings that we expected our trainees to take away from after engaging with our training. Specifically, we aim for the trainers to take away 1, an increased understanding of the Scottish nation's alcohol use, as well as a consolidated understanding of alcohol units and alcohol guidelines. We also wanted them to take away an increased knowledge of the potential factors that can contribute towards alcohol use during pregnancy, and how alcohol can affect the developing fetus. Thirdly, an increased awareness of how FAASD can affect people who have the condition, as well as its prevalence in Scotland and the UK. And lastly, awareness of key contacts, signposting opportunities, and sources of further information. Next slide, please. So just to give you a feeling of what the training kind of looked like, here's a handful of slides on the screen here that were used during the fundamentals. So for example, here we have some slides that provide trainees with a refresher on our Chief Medical Officer's advice for alcohol abstinence during pregnancy, as well as the prevalence of alcohol use during pregnancy in Scotland. We then move on to a breakdown of FAASD and how it can affect the person. So for example, we discuss the 10 brain domains that can be affected by FAASD, and give examples of how each brain domain can affect day-to-day life. So for example, executive functioning. And then lastly, we go on to signpost the trainees to some key documents that may be helpful for their practice, and should they be interested in learning more, information about how to apply to our postgraduate courses in FAASD. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the numbers trained to date, we're really proud to say that we've delivered the fundamental training over 14 times since its inception in November 2022, with over 1,300 attendees. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this screen here, we have the layout of our evaluation process, which began with the trainees completing an anonymous online questionnaire prior to the training, which assessed their baseline knowledge and attitudes towards FAASD and prenatal alcohol exposure. At T2, time 2, or post-fundamentals, the trainees were then asked to complete the same questionnaire again. So given that our key aim of this training was to provide trainees with long-lasting improvement to their knowledge and attitudes, we have 2 data collection and analyses waves that remain ongoing. So this is T3, our 3-month follow-up, and T4, our 12-month follow-up. And this is still ongoing until I think it's maybe about a month away before we close. So it's very exciting that we can get our teeth into that data. But today we'll be discussing the results of the T1 and the T2 comparisons. Next slide, please. So you'll recognise this slide. So we gave our trainees the exact same questionnaire as the knowledge and attitude survey. So just a very brief recap. It consisted of 4 components: assessing the trainees' FASD knowledge, their attitudes towards the current health advice, their attitudes towards prenatal alcohol exposure, and then attitudes towards FASD. Next slide, please. And here's a super quick summary of the demographics of our T1 sample on the screen here. So the majority of our sample were Scottish, were from a nursing or social care or social worker allied health background, and 40% of our trainees reported engaging in previous training or having some level of professional experience in alcohol exposure during pregnancy or FASD. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. So as you can see on the screen here, when you compare T1 and T2 scores, what we found was that our training had a significant positive effect on FASD knowledge score change, with 70% of our trainees showing improved knowledge post-fundamentals. So putting this into practice, let's take the example question. What proportion of individuals with FASD display one or more of the sentinel facial features? Before fundamentals, 40% of trainees got this correct, which post-fundamentals, this increased to 82%. Next slide, please. So now let's look at the effect of training on the trainees' attitudes towards current health advice. So while we noticed that there was some ceiling effects, meaning that they scored initially very highly, suggesting that the majority of the trainees were already holding positive attitudes towards health advice before attending the fundamentals. But we did notice a significant effect when we compared the T1 and T2 scores. So here, if we use the example question, women should avoid alcohol when trying to become pregnant, 84% agreed before fundamentals, and this increased to 95% post-fundamentals. Next slide. Next, let's look at the informed attitudes towards prenatal alcohol use. So again, similar to the health advice attitudes, we did find that the trainees generally held appropriate attitudes towards prenatal alcohol exposure before training. But again, what we find is with the example question, drinking alcohol during pregnancy can lead to lifelong disabilities in a child. This was 91% endorsed pre-fundamentals, increasing to 96% post-fundamentals. And next slide, please. So despite these ceiling effects that we saw in these comparisons, attitudes towards FASD is when we really see the full effect of the fundamentals training. So we found that the change in, or 82% of our trainees had a positive effect. The training had a positive effect on their scores. So if we look at the question here, diagnosis of FASD would improve outcomes for those affected by FASD. Pre-fundamentals, we got 66% agreeing, and this increased all the way up to 86% agreeing post-fundamentals. Next slide. So as well as evaluating their change in knowledge and beliefs, we're also very keen to hear the trainees' view of the training. So in the qualitative comments left by the trainees with some examples on the screen here, some key themes emerged, namely that the training was valuable to their professional careers, it gave them a deeper understanding of the condition, it raised awareness for important topics within the FASD space, and it was a helpful prompt for them to seek out further learning and resources. And we found a majority of the trainees would recommend the fundamentals to colleagues, with just under 9 out of 10 trainees reporting that they became aware of how they could apply their newly gained knowledge into their practice. Next slide, please. So super quick, just to summarise what we found that the majority of our trainees were kind of already aware of the risk associated with prenatal alcohol use and strongly endorsed the need for healthcare professionals to offer advice on reducing alcohol consumption in pregnant women. But we did notice that a proportion of the trainees still showed improvement in their attitudes following fundamentals. But what was really interesting was that most of our trainees significantly benefited from receiving additional information on the key concepts related to FASD, including its prevalence, how the condition manifests, and the importance of early diagnosis and support, given that 70% of our trainees showed increased knowledge of the condition and 82% demonstrated improved beliefs towards FASD post-training. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps for fundamentals? Well, we hope that ongoing evaluation of fundamentals will help guide us on how we can best continue providing high quality training for professionals who work both closely and distally with individuals with FASD. So for example, in order for us to continue mapping our training onto the informed level of competency, we're especially keen to have multiple iterations of the fundamentals. So this will allow it to be applicable to a broader range of professionals, such as those working in education, the criminal justice system, and public health services. I'll now pass over to Stewart, who will briefly highlight a new study that we're conducting that we would be delighted if you would be interested in participating in. I'll pass the baton over to yourself, Stewart.
Thanks, Ruth. So we decided to sneak this slide in. We have just started recruiting for a study which is looking for people with a whole range of neurodivergence, so FASD, ADHD, autism, and we're really keen to explore the concept of spatial navigation, so how do people find their way around the world. And we're looking at this using a video game called Sea Hero Quest, which is played on a mobile phone. It will take about 20 to 30 minutes to take part in the study, and it's open to children from 7 years up and also open to adolescents and adults as well. So if you are at all interested in getting a bit more information about the study, do feel free to let us know. Otherwise, you can scan the QR code and that will take you to the registration page. So if you're the parent of a child, you can fill that out and then download the game and with your child play through the game. It should be fairly easy, straightforward and navigable. And we're also particularly interested to hear how people find the experience of using a video game for research. I'm quite keen on exploring using games as a way of measuring some of the cognitive abilities rather than relying on rating scales or quite dry and boring pen and paper based tests instead. I'll just leave that up there for a moment, but I think that has wrapped us up and more than happy to start to take any questions, comments.
Oh, fabulous, guys. Amazing. I want to do that that thing with my daughter. I just think that may be amazing. Anyway, thank you so much as always. So Ruth, I'm going to come to you first with questions. I've got a list of questions that have come from the hub and from attendees. So if I can come to you first, thank you so much for everything you've told us today. It's been really enlightening, and I think our audience will have really enjoyed listening to you. But Ruth, I have a question. How do you see awareness campaigns and professional training impacting the rate of accurate and timely diagnosis?
Ooh, it's a fantastic question, I have to say, and I've been mulling over this for quite a while today. But I think there's three. I think an answer to this for me is kind of threefold. So I think, first of all, an increased recognition of the symptoms of FASD and how those can be differentiated with other neurodevelopmental conditions. I am not a clinician. I can't speak to how difficult it is, but when you hear about how FASD affects the individual, you can really see where there's ADHD-like traits, autism traits, and teasing that apart to know what is FASD and what isn't autism, what isn't ADHD. I think that's such a critical thing that training can offer, to be able to identify and tease apart what makes that individual's FASD, what makes them effectively. I think another big one is reducing stigma. I think normalizing conversations about prenatal alcohol exposure, if we make that not a women's issue, it's everyone's issue. I think that we can make strides in making those conversations that pregnant individuals have, making them more comfortable talking about potential alcohol use, talking about alcohol use in the family, making men more aware. It's such a, as a woman, it's quite frustrating sitting back and hearing all the fingers being pointed, because it's not just a women's issue, it's an everyone's issue.
World issue, isn't it?
Say that again, sorry?
It's a world issue.
It's a world issue. It is a world issue.
But I'm just going to pop a question in here that is just my question, really, is before I pass on to Stewart, is like, when you look at children with FASD and all the variants that they come with and they come from, can we really properly say what is the reason, what is the diagnosis, what is anything? It's like they are just children, and they're just young people, and they just come into this world that we all live in, and everybody's trying to diagnose and put them into categories. And for me, I really struggle with the fact that my daughter may be put into an ADHD or an autism and it's like, she is just a person, and she can exist in a world, but it's very, very difficult to find the strategies and the scaffolding that will make her okay, because she is very different to every single other person on the FASD spectrum. So all the time I'm fighting people and establishments and schools to try and make her thing okay. And what I, as a parent, and I'm sure there are more parents listening tonight, is like, what I struggle with is that schools only have so many resources, schools only have so many teachers, but they have masses of parents who are obviously advocates for their children. And we talk all the time about the fact that, one person with FASD, one person with FASD. So obviously, then if you've got 5 children in your school with FASD, that's 5 different children in a school who all have different needs. And it's like, how do you tell professionals as parents where you sit? Not telling them to do their job, but just trying to be empathetic to their need for change, because consequently everything is, the SEND things in England, that special educational needs education in England is horrendous. It's not great in Scotland, it's not great in Ireland. It's always, parents are complaining continuously. It's always like, oh my gosh, the parents are complaining. But complaining doesn't really help. Parents shouting doesn't really help. It doesn't move forward for change. What it needs to be is constructive conversations about what is required for our children to be able to move forward in a positive way and acknowledge that they maybe can't achieve things on the traditional academic routes, but that they have talents and they can achieve on another level, and they can get to a level where they can exist and function with living skills that are relevant to their future. So I think, I guess my question is, how would you put that into a thing that people can understand? Because it's very, very difficult for parents.
I can imagine it would be immensely difficult for parents. And I think when you were talking there, Jo, I think just harkening back to what myself and Stuart have found is that baseline people kind of know roughly that, okay, we know the health messaging about alcohol use during pregnancy, blah, 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 blah. But when you look at FASD, that's where you're noticing the substantial gaps.
Yeah.
And I think you've raised such a good point, Jo, that it's very easy for I'm casting a bit of a wide net here, but a very simplistic view of ADHD is, oh, they're hyper. A very simplistic view of autism is that they have different ways functioning socially. But with FASD, as you say, a person with FASD is a person with FASD. So if we have as researchers and trainers to be able to shout from the rooftops that there's so many different ways in which that FASD can make someone them, both their strengths and their challenges. I think that's such a key thing. So it's not just
That's huge, Ruth. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. We'll be championing that, I promise you, Jo.
Thank you. Stewart, can I come to you and say, I have a couple of questions, but what were the most surprising findings from your survey on health and social care professionals' knowledge and attitudes towards like FASD? Because I think, in my role within the hub, it's like I'm supporting families, but I'm not an academic. So I'm on the ground. I'm an adoptive parent with kids. So it's really interesting to know where you sit as a professional.
Yeah, and I think one of the really interesting things for me is looking at where people have had previous training and seeing those quite low proportions of people that are reporting learning about FASD through their undergraduate or postgraduate education. And with it being less than 20% for those, so that's kind of 80% of that sample have been through, for a health and social care sample, have been through their education and kind of haven't been exposed to FASD. And I find that really surprising. And I think that's one of the big things that we need to change, because I'm sure if you ask those same professionals, they're training on autism, ADHD, other neurodevelopmental conditions, it would be a very different picture. And I think getting the training into those courses and even through the undergrad, making sure people are having modules on FASD alongside any of the other neurodevelopmental conditions, I think that was one of the surprising findings, but I also think it's one of the things that we need to work on to really improve the workforce's knowledge. So when they enter the workforce, FASD doesn't come as a shock and a surprise, and that they have got a base level of knowledge should the question of FASD come up, or should they be interacting with a family seeking a diagnosis or an individual with FASD requiring support.
So that said, what changes would you like to see in the training of professionals for doctors and social workers, and because as a parent, in my role at the hub, but ultimately I'm not an academic, I'm not a clinician, I'm a lived experience parent. And I have had huge involvement with professionals, obviously, as you understand. So, what would you like professionals training to change, to help parents and young people who potentially have an FASD diagnosis? Because I think most parents feel not necessarily unheard, but dismissed, and very often sort of told that they are, not relevant to have an opinion. And I just think my view is, and I could be wrong, but my view is that as parents, we probably know our children best, but we don't, we shouldn't profess to be professionals. So we should be guided, but we should be, I believe, entitled to a role to step in to say, we have value in our opinion.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there's a stark contrast between a parent raising a child with FASD who's probably done so much reading about the condition and has had to learn so much about it. But the changes that I'd like to see is for FASD to have a kind of commensurate level of focus as any other neurodevelopmental condition. I mean, if we could get to the place where we look at it in terms of the prevalence and say it's as one of the more prevalent conditions, it should probably be more of a focus than any of the others. But I think in doing that, it needs to be accompanied by that lived experience voice and the focus on stigma right from the get-go, rather than, I think there could be an avoidance of the dealing with the stigma side of things, but I think that needs to be addressed at the outset as well.
So, we're getting close to the end now, but from your perspective, what are the key steps that the UK as a whole, not just Scotland, needs to take to create a more supportive and informed system for children and young people with FASD? What does our government need to do? What does our education system need to do? What do we need to do to make this a better landscape for our children?
I think we've spoken a lot about the knowledge and awareness amongst health and social care professionals, but I would be fascinated to know what the level of knowledge amongst the general public is, and what role really general public information campaigns could play, so to bring all of the population along learning about FASD at the same time as doing that targeted work with the professionals. And Ruth, just wondering if you'd had any thoughts to add to that.
Yeah, no, I'm completely, you're bang on, Stuart, with that. And I think just to build on that, I think when you go out, because there has been a couple of studies that have looked at how much the public know about alcohol use during pregnancy, and you're finding that yes, there is room for improvement, and there's a general awareness of consuming alcohol during pregnancy isn't it's best to avoid it, but that's kind of where the knowledge ends. No, there doesn't seem to be a good understanding of what can happen when alcohol gets into the system. There isn't, and even less, I would imagine, about FASD itself, because
that's what I say all the time. I'm like, I constantly harp on in England about the fact, I mean, this is like really going off on a tangent now, but I've got a 19-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter who you know, my son went through mainstream school. My daughter with FAAST has gone through a specialist school. And I really question the PSHE and the sex education because my son who's 20 in October, so obviously an elder child, inter-country adoption, no FASD, nothing, but with a younger sibling, has constantly told me that, yeah, mum, that you know, they do this thing at school and they tell us don't drink, don't drink. But he said they don't say anything about why. He said, but they talk about cheese, you know, and it's like he's only 19 and he just plays football and that's his thing. He's a footballer. But I'm just like, I just really struggle to understand why it's not something that we're telling people that is a real issue to give them choice. You know, I know that we've seen so much in the media about the media messages are we're doing the wrong thing and saying all this stuff, but I just think like anything, you know, we tell people not to have cheese, so tell them not to have alcohol, and we sort of do that in a little bit of a way, but we don't expand on the way, on the why you shouldn't do it. And we also don't give them examples or lived experience families or people who can actually say to them, you know, this is why you shouldn't do it and this is the consequence. Because, you know, we're always saying about the positives and children can achieve, and of course they can, but also it's the struggles for the families that I think we really need to focus on. But anyway, I'm really mindful that we sadly are coming, like we're really at the end of it, and I could stay here talking to you both forever because it's been so good and I've got so many more questions to ask you that I can't. So I'm going to ask you both if you would be willing to come back and do another one, you know, maybe in the autumn or something.
We'd love to.
Because it's just been great to hear like proper research and proper information that I'm sure our community would love. So thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I just have too many questions. I could be here forever. So I can't keep you all night, but thank you so much. So appreciate you being with us this evening.
And thank you so much again. Thank you so much for giving us this hour to have the opportunity to share our research. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much. For anybody that is going down to the Salford conference, I'll be kicking around there, rehashing the presentation I gave today, so feel free to skip it.
I'll be there, Stuart. I'll be there. Look forward to seeing you next week.